tried to take into account the competitiveness of it, the budget of it, so the cost of it, and the complexity. So I feel that there are a lot of decks in the game that can be quite complex for a modern day player. Like if you're a modern day player or a player coming back into the game and money isn't an issue for you and you go and blow it all on Snake Eyes Azaminas, it could probably be a little bit overwhelming because you're playing around with fusions, you're playing around with link monsters, like all of that, especially if you come back into the game from like when you're just used to synchros or just fusions, can be a little bit daunting. So what I thought I'd do today, going over these types of decks, is we'll talk about the ones that either have a single mechanic, so either they just focus on main deck cards or main deck summons, or cards where they don't even care about the extra deck whatsoever, or when they do care about the extra deck, they are focusing on pretty much one style. And when you're playing that style, it gives you different learning curves. So for example, and Tempai will feature on this list, shocker, with Tempai, I feel that they're one of the best decks that Konami have ever printed, in a sense that when you get it together, when you start taking away, like it can fit in relatively budget. I suppose we'll start with Tempai. Screw it. Let's just dive head first and start with Tempai. So Tempai is, in my opinion, one of, if not the best deck that you can get that is budget and is for beginners and is massively competitive. I would say it's probably the most consistently competitive deck on this list. However, the benefit or the downside to that is because everyone expects Tempais to be showing up, Tempais will have a bit of a target on its back. So keep that in mind. But with Tempai, what's really, really good is that it focuses on mainly one mechanic in the form of the synchro summoning capabilities. It teaches players a lot about the battle phase. And what I mean by that is it pretty much goes, if you use the field spell, you don't really need to worry about main phase 1 interactions, which can be a little bit complex sometimes, but you do need to kind of remember that. But then when you get into the battle phase, it does give you a lot of things to learn in regards to damage step and everything else from that point on, because you have a lot of Tempai monsters that can trigger in the damage step, which give you a very thin line of protection, and then you have other card effects that help you build up. The other benefit of something like Tempai is it can mainly focus on just going second, so that takes away the complexity of having to go first. Not saying you won't be going first, but it's one thing that you can focus on your strengths and go, right, okay, I'm going to design to break board. It gives you that benefit of flipping between a hand trap variant or a board breaking variant. So again, you get the benefit of being able to shift between two different variants. And the cost of the deck itself is not massively expensive. Now that Trident Dragon's been reprinted, the only cards you really need to be getting a hold of that are absolute must for the deck that are going to cost you a little bit of money will be stuff like Pydra, which is about £4 a copy, and then one Transcendent Dragon, which is probably about £4 a copy as well. So straight away, you could probably build a full deck with cheap reprints of stuff like Ash Blossoms, Imperms, Veilers, and all of that, especially when the Blue Eye Structure decks come out in February this year for a heck of a lot cheaper. So you could probably build a full Tempai deck for about £50 to £100, and that's kind of the budget that I'm looking within. It definitely fits within the cost structure. It definitely fits in a low level of complexity, so it's nothing too brain boggling for you, for like players in general. And then it's also very, very competitive. So we've definitely started at the top with Tempai. That, in my opinion, is the best one. But I feel that that's a deck that everyone goes through straight away, that it's like Tempai is the one to go to. The only downside you're going to have with Tempai is in a couple of months' time, it may or may not still be playable if we do get a ban list and they do decide to hit Tempai on it. Because at the end of the day, if they hit Snake Eyes Azaminas, or they hit mainly the Snake Eyes, and they hit Yugioh strategy, you then can't let Tempai go unhit, because then it means that it will just become dominant number one again anyway. So, yeah, we kind of jumped into that one. So before that, I'll say hello to Clockwreck, Spiros, and Sandgreen. So Sandgreen has asked, when is the Blue Eyes structure decks coming out? So they actually come out on the 7th of February this year, which ironically is 2 days before the UK Nationals. UK Birmingham YCS. So that'll be very interesting. Clockwork has said where to start. Runic Stun and Tempai, no need to play anything else. I mean, there is a need to play everything else, because unfortunately Tempai is very mono, and so is Runic Stun. But I will talk about Runic Stun in a minute as well, because Runic Stun is definitely another deck on here as well. So moving on, I mean, we might as well start with Runic Stun. That's the one that's already been brought up as well. So Runic Stun, what makes that so interesting is, or so, like, it fits within the cost. Like I said, I'm going to reiterate every single time I do these decks. We are looking at cost, complexity, and competitiveness. Runic Stun is definitely up there. So Runic Stun takes away the complexity of being able to heavy combo because you don't really need to worry about heavy comboing too much. It then pretty much sets up to lock your opponent down and then deck them out. It lets you use loads of spell cards, which takes away the need of more monsters and normal summons and everything else in between. Its extra deck summon is very, very baseline and basic. You can get a full Runic core for about £50 here in the UK. And then when you start adding in your additional hand traps or even floodgate cards, stuff like Gozen, Rivalry, Tikaboo, Synchro Zone, all of the cards like that, it then still builds up a little bit, but you probably don't even break the £100 budget. It's definitely competitive because there are very few decks that are actually pre-prepared for those type of decks, and the floodgates and runics can be very damaging because it's a real good counter against the Tempai strategy. It's a good counter against the Yugioh strategy, and it's also a relatively good counter against the Snake Eyes strategy as well, because if you lock them down and slow them down, the runics are just there to pick away at it. The only downside of the Runic Stun version is that it's not really designed to be aggressive and all out in a fast-paced manner. That being said, the deck and the strategy has built-in burn capabilities, so you don't really even need to worry about going full OTK and out there. The monsters that you do use are lockdown monsters, stuff like Inspector Boulder, Fossil Diner, Moon Mirror Shield, all that stuff as well, can be very, very good and very, very effective. So that's where the competitive nature comes into play. We've already ticked off the cost, and then the complexity is very minimal because there's no longer need to do, okay, I need to go chain it 1 this, chain it 2 this, chain it 3 this, chain it 4 this, or I need to build my combos A, B, and C to get this outcome. You can literally just go, cool. The only combo you need to know is activate a runic card, get your Hugin get you the field spell, activate another runic card, draw cards. That's pretty much all you need to kind of get your head around. It's me, new to the modern game, originally a GOAT player. I started with Gate Guardian and moved to Pearly. Do you think Pearly will still be good choice moving forward? Pearly is actually a really good one that I didn't have on the list. So I'm actually going to add this to the list. So Pearly is definitely a good deck. It's very, very cheap right now. It does have a very decent amount of draw power built into it as well. I don't feel that it has... I think it's a little bit more complex than something like Tempai or Runic Stun. But it's still... like, once you get your head around it... Now, when I'm talking about complexity will be different for different people. Like, some people, they naturally will have their brain built for being able to learn combos inside and out, revision, and know them in, and like, perfectly fine. That's fine. I'm just taking the baseline decks of where it doesn't have like anything insane that you need to do in order to play a certain way. So a deck that I will mention a little bit later on in more depth is something like Six Samurai. Now, I won't count Six Samurai within the best decks right now, but it's definitely one of the decks that you could consider to play. And the reason I'm not considering it in this topic of discussion is because I feel that the complexity level is a little bit higher than the rest of the decks on this list. Because you have different ways of being able to, or having to protect yourself from certain plays, you auto lose to certain hand traps as well that the main meta is playing. It's not really the most competitive of all of them. Now, don't get me wrong, because I really do like Six Samurai. I think that the deck's really, really fun, really powerful. But I do feel that modernized game, they have a lot of the best decks of 1 or 2 card combos. And some of the decks that I'm looking at here are either going to be 1 or 2 card combos, or they're going to be decks that can build up a board and protect and slow the game's pace down, which is what makes them as effective as they are. So, going back to the question of do I think Pearly's is a good choice going forward? It's definitely a good choice going forward. I feel that it's safe from a ban list. I can't think of anything amazing that's going to get hit with it. The only issue with Pearly's is if the Raziels that we are getting in December become a really big thing, a lot of decks will be trying to play cards that out XYZ monsters. So you might want to consider stuff like XYZ Encore might be floating around. D-Barrier will definitely be floating around. And just kind of cards like that might put you at a bit more of a disadvantage than you currently are in this format. That being said, this format's a bit of a weird one because of cards like Dimension Shifter, the Pearly, so Molchummy, Perulia, and Fluoros. But that being said, Pearlies can still pretty much function as they should be able to. They can still get their board out there. And then when they're sitting on like pretty much indestructible towers, that lets them draw like 3 or 4 cards, which is crazy. And then the ability to bounce cards can be very, very damaging. And can be very, very strong. So, I mean, we don't have any Pearlies at our locals at this exact moment in time. But there is a player that is looking to put them together. I have faced them a couple of times. They are an annoying deck to face. I just don't think that they're as dominant or as consistent as they were previously. Like, I feel we've got YCS Bologna next weekend. I would be surprised if we see many Pearlies on the top tables. But it's still a very good competitive deck that isn't massively complex and isn't massively expensive as well. So definitely a decent deck. Okay, trying to get back into the list. So the next one I'm going to talk about is going to be Labyrinths. Now, Labyrinths, because of the reprints in the Megatins, have just become incredibly cheap and easy to put together. They are quite like a Runic Stun build, but they give you a bit more aggression to the board. And rather than focusing on spells, they focus on traps a lot more. Especially with a card like Transaction Rollback being reprinted, this can also open up the door for stuff like Paleo, which I'll mention a little bit later on. But the idea is that Labyrinths gives you that ability to slow the pace of the game down. They actually have the ability to play a lot of really good trap cards and a lot of really good Floodgate style cards. So again, they could utilize stuff like Gozen, they can utilize stuff like Rivalry. They do need to be a little bit worried about Ash Blossom, but everyone is playing Ash Blossom, so your deck should be able to play through it a little bit more. On top of that, they do be able to use stuff like Daruma Cannon, and they can play some of the strongest kind of back row cards in the form of Daruma Cannon. There's also the Addition one, and I never know the name of this one because I haven't played it myself, but it's the one that's like, you reveal cards or you banish cards from your extra deck that add up to a certain amount, and then you destroy that amount on your opponent's board. Like, someone will probably know the answer of that exact card. I'll try and find it and put it on the screen so you have a visualization for it. But the idea behind that is you can kind of see that the deck is still very playable. It has some great inbuilt main deck boss monsters that give you automatic protection for your back row, which is something you need to be wary of. And it's whether you are playing the furniture version or just the pure Floodgate version, you can utilize both sides of it, which is really, really good, really powerful. And that's kind of what gives Labyrinth a good level in the best deck for beginners. Now, the one downside of Labyrinth, in my opinion, is it can be a little bit more complex than the normal decks that you would normally play, for the pure fact that when you're trying to play your combos, you've got stuff like the Lady Labyrinth, which is a when effect, and it has an if effect. So you need to learn the differences between whens and ifs and when you need to activate them. You've also got to remember that there's trap cards in the grave that you're going to need to banish to return cards to the hand and everything else in between. So it does give you something more to think about. So its complexity level is a little bit higher. But, there we go. The math card is Simultaneous Equation Cannon. That is exactly what it is. And that card is a pain in the ass to try and, like, I think, again, that's a card that you kind of increase your own complexity. But once you know it and understand it and know when to interact, it becomes a lot easier. Like, I feel the more and more you play it, if you're in a Tempai matchup, you'll know at the exact point of when you're going to activate it. And if you're in a Yubel matchup, you'll know the exact point when to activate it, what to reveal, and what to do. I feel it's when it comes down to the rogue matchups when you're going to be like, okay, I don't know at what point they put the right maths on the board that I need to have in order to activate and resolve this card. Still really, really good. And yeah, I feel the Labyrinths kind of give you a nice level to play around with. It definitely slows the game down. It's kind of like a more advanced version of Trap Tricks, which is also on this list as well, purely because the Trap Tricks came in the structure decks, are a little bit more budget than the Labyrinths, or just a lot easier to kind of find the rest of it. But you would probably go, okay, well, if I start off with Trap Tricks, I'll probably evolve into Labyrinths, and that's kind of how you can get your progression going. The next one on this list is Dark World. Now, I say this list, I've kind of got some that I want to put in like the top 10s, and I've got some that I want to put down as like honorable mentions. But Dark Worlds I've put on this list. Now, there was a video about some leaks the other day, but until I have official, like an official post of where they came from, I'm not going to treat them, because if they're real, the cards are cracked as heck. But Dark Worlds, the reason they're on here is budget-wise or cost-wise, definitely a heck of a lot cheaper. You got most of it in the structure decks. The one card that was expensive in the main archetype was Dark Corridor, and that got reprinted in the Megatin, so that's a heck of a lot cheaper. And then on top of that, you take into account that Triple Tactics Thrust has just been reprinted as well. That is a card that the deck can utilize to its max potential. The biggest issue with a deck like Dark Worlds is that I feel that it does always falter dependent on the format. While cards like D-Shifter and Draw and Lockbird are running around, it can be a heck of a lot weaker. That also being said, the fact that it could utilize many different versions, whether you want to go down a future version, whether you want to go down a danger version, and the fact that there's possibility of it having future support, it does give it a little bit more future-proof accessibility. And it is one of them decks that could utilize itself without needing to worry too much about the extra deck. But when you're trying to take complexity into a case, the one thing that the Dark Worlds will provide you with a little bit more complexity on is the complexity of the extra deck, because it can go through XYZs, fusions, and link monsters, so it kind of opens up that branch. And of course, it does utilize, again, with Dark Worlds, is discard by card effect, and then with Dangers, just discarded it in general. So you start to learn the differences between those two, and the differences between that kind of... I wouldn't say text, but that's not the right word. The conjunctions of Yu-Gi-Oh, which I think the complexity level's there. Cost is definitely low. I would say that its competitiveness isn't at its highest, but it's still a very, very good deck that can compete with the right matchups, the right format. But it's one of them ones right now, it kind of floats within this middle ground of just a fun, easy, cheap deck to put together that could just use powerhouses and spawn the board very easily. As well as hand rip, but that's a bit degenerate. Absolutely fine. Mermail is definitely one of the decks to look towards. The benefit of Mermails right now is they've got brand new support. Most of the expensive cards in Mermails were just reprinted in Rarity Collection 3, and the deck is actually really, really kind of good. I'm not too sure on its overall budget level. It could definitely be one of the decks on this list, but I feel the complexity of it. Like, I've watched the deck at locals for quite a few weeks now, and it's pretty amazing how much the deck can play through. Now, again, on the flip side, the issue is if you draw and lock them, they can't play. And if you shift to them, they can't play. It really is just an auto lose at that point, which is really damaging. That being said, if you learn the deck inside and out, if you don't face up against a shifter match, which might change come January if we get a new ban list, then the deck will definitely run riot. The deck's really, really kind of cool. I do like it. It's not my particular type of deck. Like, if I wanted to go and play a water deck, I'd be looking more towards Ice Barriers, which is a little bit more control-orientated. Or Sharks. Sharks is definitely combo orientated as well. But the Mermail Atlantean deck, what I love about it is just its pure outright versatility. Like, the fact that it discards cards as cost and then it starts building up chain links after it's already summoned stuff to the board just gives your opponent so much to worry about that I could probably arguably see Mermails being on this list as well. I feel its complexity level is a little bit higher and its cost is a little bit higher than most, but it's definitely a deck you could put together without much of an issue and learn it quite easily. So the next one I'm going to talk about is Exo Sisters. Now, I think Exo Sisters are like one of the best baseline combo decks that also have a borderline control element to it that you can get into in the game. And what I mean by that is the deck can be very control with the fact that it can still play Dimension Shifter. Also, its end board going first pretty much sets up 1 to 2, if not 3, banish effects. And then it also sets up with a negate and a dodge. It's combo orientated, but it's combo orientated at a very easy level because it basically just goes, cool, Martha, summon out another one, work your way up into Machillis, search, do everything you need to. So it's very slow combo orientated to get to its end goal, and it locks you into Exo Sisters. So it makes it very, very baseline. Like, there's no, do I go this way or this way to kind of change up what type of outcome you want. Like, your outcome is very linear. It's always pretty much going to be one of the trap cards, mainly Returnia, plus the Exo Sisters, that then gives you the ability to banish, tag out, go to Machillis, which banishes again, and then Returnia gives you the ability to banish once, if not twice as well. So you're getting 4 banishes, and then you back that up with stuff like D-Shifters or additional hand trap cards. The deck can be very, very powerful, very fun, and I really do enjoy it, and I think you can build it on a very tidy budget and compete with it. The next one is one of my personal favorites, and that's Exodia Millennium. What I love about Exodia Millennium is it's kind of like Tempai, but with Exodia. The benefit of the Exodia deck, which is what I quite like in comparison to the Tempai, is it can shift to be control. It lets you use stuff like Secret Village, which is really powerful for the deck as well, especially when you're setting yourself up with an Exodia monster, which is insanely strong. It can shift to be an OTK machine, and you are then able to start playing stuff because it doesn't rely on its normal summon that heavily to play with some of the best normal summons of the game in the form of stuff like Denko Sekka to shut out control decks. It can shut out big boards by being able to play Lava Golem. It can easily OTK just by activating Unk and summoning out an Exodia of 8,000. It can main deck all of the powerful hand traps that your Tempais can play in the stuff like D-Shifter it can main. It can then also main stuff like Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood, which I personally love, because the idea is I drop that on my opponent and my opponent's like, why the hell is that card being mained? And then you go, okay, cool, activate Unk, turn my Exodia into like a 16,000 attack powerhouse. You can then play loads of board breakers, or you can play hand traps. It depends on which version you want to go for. And then the brand new card, Heart of the Blue Eyes, gives you more consistent access to Unk, and you don't need to care about your extra deck apart from the Exodia. The rest of your extra deck can be Ultimate Slayer targets, can be Super Poly targets, they can just be Dogmatica punishment targets. Like, it has so much flexibility, it's crazy. If you wanted to, you could play Pot of Extravagance, give you a little bit more draw capacity, but the biggest risk of that is if you banish 6 and you end up banishing all 3 of your Exodias, it's pretty much GG, which is a big sad. The other downside of it is, unlike Tempai, where it doesn't really play like heavy bricks, you play all 5 pieces of Exodia, and all 5 pieces of Exodia are heavy bricks, which is a big issue with it. But it's still a very, very good deck. I thoroughly enjoy it. I think it's a really kind of cool option. And it's one of them ones that I do like to quite shift to kind of catch people off very easily. The Blue Eyes being a 3k body is massively amazing. The biggest downside of it is, depending on the version you are playing, is very specific to get it out of the graveyard. If it had the same effect as the rest of the Millenniums, it could go into the spell and trap zone and then summon itself, broken. But then I fully understand why it's not like that, because if you were to do something like that, that's when you'd be like, okay, cool, activate it, summon out a level 8 for free, and that's when you can start abusing it into Blue Eyes as well. But Millennium Exodia is like one of my personal favorite fun decks right now. Very, very cheap, and everything else. Another one that is definitely up here is Fire Kings. Now, you can class it as pure Fire Kings. You can class it as Fire Kings with Snake Eyes. You could probably class it as Fire King Dogmatica. It really is up to you. You can still play the Snake Eyes version on a tidy budget if you wanted to as well, just because everything's been reprinted. You would just have to play... actually, no, because even Witches and Wanteds have been reprinted, even though the Witches and Wanteds are like £6 each. But you can still very easily put it together without a big issue. So I would say Fire Kings are definitely up here, even with Volcanics. Like, their brand new card that everyone panicked about being a £30 card ended up being a £10 card, which is crazy cheap and easy to do. So you could definitely be putting that deck together. It's very aggressive. It doesn't need to rely on the extra deck that much unless you add in the Snake Eyes. When you add in the Snake Eyes, you add in a level of complexity. I know there is a newer player at locals that currently plays Fire King with Dogmaticas, and he's just slowly started to get pieces of it. And what I love about the Fire King Dogmatica version of the deck that he plays is that it does normal Fire King plays, but then sets up a window off of the back of the Dogmatica plays, which is personally what I quite like to do off of Dogmaticas, because then you're basically sitting there with all of these strong Fire King monsters that have ways of being able to pop cards, negate cards, do what you need to do, and then be able to also control your opponent with a window when you need to as well. So Fire Kings are definitely up there, whether you want to play them with Snake Eyes, whether you want to play them with Dogmaticas or even Tri-Brigade. I feel that the variations of those go down. Like, for Snake Eyes, the cost level is probably towards the top end, but so is the competitiveness and the complexity. For cost in the Dogmatica version, the complexity is a lot lower, the cost is a lot lower, and the competitiveness is a lot lower as well. And then with Tri-Brigade, unfortunately, I think the cost is about the same as the Dogmaticas. The complexity is a little bit more than the Dogmaticas, but not as much as the Snake Eyes. And then the competitiveness is lower than the Dogmaticas, in my opinion, just because you have to have a lot of things go for you, and then you can't really protect from stuff like Nibiru and everything else in between. Moving on to the next one. So this is another honorary mention. So let's talk about Flunders. I think Flunders are a very good deck. It's very basic. But the issue is it loses to stuff like the old Molchummy, so Perulia. It loses to Draw and Lockbird, which are both cards being utilized in the format right now. And unfortunately, the Riser or even the Mist Valley Apex play isn't as effective as it once was, because you were able to pretty much combo off and use the Mist Valley Apex Avian plus the ability to get you into the Barrier Statue or the ability to get you into the Riser to really slow your opponent down and pick apart their board. Whereas now, the pace of the format doesn't allow you to do that. And because your opponent has so many one-card starters and one-card power cards, it's not really as effective as it once was. Like, yes, okay, they would need to open up like a Lightning Storm to destroy your monsters, and that's if you don't already have the field spell in play. So they would need to open up Lightning Storm for the back row and then also Rogeki for the front one. So it's very good deck, but again, as someone else has also pointed out on this one as well, it just dies to very good and common cards. So which is why it's more of an honorary mention than the best deck to get. But again, when you're looking at cost is probably like middle ground. Complexity, probably middle ground or lower. And then competitiveness is probably middle ground or a little bit lower as well. So there's loads of different ratios of what you can do on this. And these are just my opinions on the cost and complexity and competitiveness. But you might be able to see that a little bit more research that you do on those decks yourself. The last one that or the penultimate one we're going to talk about is we're going to be talking about Voiceless Voice. Now, the reason that Voiceless Voice is so good, and again, relatively cheap, is a lot of people have started to sell their cores. So you're able to get Low, which is the most expensive card for that set, for relatively low price. So it's probably about £15 a copy, maybe a little bit less, and you can pick up 3 of those. And what makes Voiceless Voice so good is it's very basic in the sense of what it tries to achieve, and the fact of the matter is it doesn't really run into many of the hand traps. It can play around Shifter slightly, it can play around Droll definitely, and it can also play around both of the Molchummies. So like the competitive higher end hand traps it can play around, but it can struggle against the lower end common hand traps, stuff like Imperms and Ashes and Veilers and everything else. Now, obviously, less so the target effects once it gets the Low and the Skull Guardian lock on the board, because once it gets that on the board, it's very difficult because they then can't target and they can't destroy it, and then they're forced to attack the ritual, and the ritual has an Omni negate, which is usually backed up by the trap card, and then of course a Soravus that can negate a summon. So from very little, it can build a very impressive and very powerful board that will cause a lot of issues to the competitive players. But I feel once it gets to the higher end of the competitive scale, that's when more players, unless you know exactly what you're doing with the deck and you're able to add a little bit more investment to it, will start to struggle in its back and forth. So, right, before we talk about the future, let's just have a quick highlight of what we talked about. So we talked about Tempai, we talked about Labyrinth, we've talked about Paleo, Runic Stun, Exodia, Fire King, Voiceless Voice. They're like my top 7. And then if you kind of look at Exo Sisters, I think are just an incredibly good, consistent, and basic level deck, alongside Flunder. And you could also arguably put Pearlies in there as well. I feel that Pearlies have a nice balance of everything required. And it's kind of one of those ones that all hit that mid-ground of cost, complexity, and competitiveness, or higher. I feel the rest, they all fluctuate in different elements, and probably some of them will be at the lower end of the complexity scale, or the cost scale, or even the competitive scale. The final deck I want to talk about for you guys today is, of course, Blue Eyes White Dragon. Now, Blue Eyes White Dragon will be the first structure deck that we would have received since 2023. Yeah, I know, it's shocking that in all of 2024, we did not receive a single structure deck. And before you go, wait a minute, wasn't Fire Kings in 2024? Nope, it was December of 2023, which shocked me as well when I found that out. So Blue Eyes will be hitting the UK stores in the form of the 7th of February, which is 2 days. So we get them officially on the Thursday, and the first pre-registration day for YCS Birmingham is on the Friday. So you'll have 1 day to play Blue Eyes. Now Blue Eyes is very, very good. I do feel that I wouldn't say it's going to be the top end competitiveness. I feel that at YCS Birmingham we'll see a lot of it because a lot of people will just be building it out of nostalgia. The one thing that is holding Blue Eyes back from being budget is the fact of the matter is that Magia is only available in a quarter century secret rare, and some of them are going from anywhere between 500 to 800 to maybe even £1,000, which is absolutely crazy. So when I'm looking at Blue Eyes, I'm looking at Blue Eyes without Magia. What can the deck do without Magia? It can actually do quite a lot. The other issue is that it will burn through Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon quite consistently, and it doesn't set up instant protection from something like a Nibiru. On top of that, you can also work your way into a lot of level 12 synchro monsters, and the brand new level 12 synchro monster is absolutely incredible and insane. So one card, if you are watching, that you need to go and pick up will be a Crimson Dragon right here, right now, if you're looking to build Blue Eyes, as I almost guarantee that card will not be in the structure deck. And then you want to start looking at other generic level 12s that the deck can utilize in the form of dragons. So you'll be looking at like your Cosmic Blazar Dragon, you've got the Starlight, Stardust, I can't remember his name. It's a level 12 Stardust Dragon, but keep an eye on that one. Dominus Purge is also one that the deck can play because it doesn't really mind of locking itself out of Darks. I believe it's Darks Waters, I want to say. Dark Waters, and it's not Earths. Not Winds. Dark Waters and Fire? It might be Dark Waters and Fire. Yeah, Dark Waters and Fire for Dominus Purge. So that's another card you might want to consider picking up, which kind of allows you to replace the Ash Blossoms. But that being said, the structure deck comes with Ash Blossom, Droll, Imperm, and Veiler. So even its reprints are absolutely insane. So it's like cost effectiveness is going to be up there. The competitive nature is still undecided because I don't know how much it's going to be able to do with the modernized kind of game and without having access to Magia to protect all of your builds or the board that you're trying to build. Complexity, I feel, would be about middle ground as well, just because there will be a lot of combos for the deck, and it is a heavily combo-orientated deck to kind of get your head around. That being said, the deck is still very, very good, very, very effective, and can give you loads of different outcomes, depending on what you're trying to do. So it's definitely one that you want to look out for the future. It's definitely one you want to keep an eye on, and I definitely feel that it's a deck that you're going to want to be picking up come January, whether it just be for those four amazing hand trap reprints in the deck, plus of course the new addition of being able to get hold of the new ability of getting a quarter century secret rare in one of them, or the possibility of, well, not an or, but you will be able to get each of the, I think it's like 4 cards are available as a secret rare, as a promo, but then you also have the a possibility of one of those 4 promo cards being upgraded to a secret rare as well. So hand traps, definitely great for that. Budget wise, definitely great for it. But then on top of it, it's just dependent on if we're going to get a Magia reprint anytime soon, or if Konami, TCG are going to sit on that ability of, if you want to play Blue Eyes to its max potential, pay £1,000, whereas the OCG are like, here, you can have one for like 700 yen, which is like £7 or something. So yeah, that is it for the best decks for beginners. I feel that there's a lot to consider, and I feel that depending on your playstyle, that's where it might vary. in regards to finding a deck that works for you, rather than going out and go, oh, I like the look of that deck, I'm going to go buy it. Find a deck online, put it together digitally, like Yugioh Pro, Dualbook, anything like that. Test it out and then go, okay, I like this control nature of it, let's look into buying it. Or I like this combo orientation, let's look into it. Or if you don't like either of them, you shift to the other side and go, okay, well, I don't like combo, it's too much for my brain, I'm going to go control. Or I don't like control, it's too basic, I'm going to go to combo. So you've got loads of different options. Try it out online before you buy, then go and buy it, then try it out at home, and then take it to your local environment. And each of those steps, even if you go to your first local environment and you get absolutely trashed, as long as you're learning as you're going, that's how you're going to develop as a player. Like when I came back into the game, I went back to I found a locals around me, went to my locals with a 60 card pile. It was literally a Utopia deck with a couple of cards that I pulled from a booster pack, and that was well over 10 years ago. We did 5 rounds of Swiss. I lost every single one of them apart from one. And that was enough to make me go, right, I've learned so much here. And I started to learn because I had come back during the time. I skipped the synchro phase and I came back into the XYZ phase with Tellarknight. I came back during Duelist Alliance. So Pendulums, Tellarknight, Shadows, Yang Zings. And it took me a good few months before I started to learn, started to putting a deck together and everything else. Like they weren't as good as structure decks as they are right now. So that's definitely a good step up that Konami have provided to most players. And that's usually one of the best ways to start. But with the amount of reprints, thanks to Megatins and everything else in between, being able to get decks like Labyrinth, Exo Sisters, Runestun, stuff that doesn't come in a sealed structure deck is a lot easier nowadays and a lot cheaper to do. So it's a lot better for beginner decks or beginner players. Whether you're coming back into the game, whether you're just picking the game up from scratch, it definitely gives you more to look into and go from there. Thanks so much for watching this segment on the best decks for beginners. If you do have any questions, comments down below, I'd be more than happy to answer them. For now, as absolutely always, stay safe and of course, happy dueling.